Good. All right. Hope everybody had another good lunch today. A good opportunity to still network over the lunch hour here, and presentations are going pretty well. So, as we start off this afternoon, I'd like to introduce Tom Clark from Kleinfelder, who's going to be talking about some alternative pollution abatement ideas and. For the borehole up in Old Forge in Lackawanna County and the Duryea Breach, which is also just downstream of that particular area on the Lackawanna River. So with that, I'd like to bring Tom up to talk about the program here in the presentation he's got.
Thanks, Bobby. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your attendance. Yeah, Bobby mentioned alternative pollution abatement ideas. This is pretty much one idea, and it might be an idea that maybe others thought about, but I think I found some data, and the last slide kind of brings it all together where I think the idea at least should be considered and talked about. If you're not familiar with the Old Forge and Duryea Breach situation on the Lackawanna River, you essentially have a Lackawanna River that's in pretty good water quality in terms of AMD. I mean, it has sewage and things like that, all the way down to like the last 3.5 miles of the river before it goes in the Susquehanna River, and then it's kind of destroyed by two of the largest discharges in the state that are massive in flow, but the water quality is, what I would once again call fairly benign. But because of the flows are so large, the cost of doing anything there in terms of like an active treatment plan is intense. So when you find out how much that could cost, you start thinking about, could there be another way, particularly when you're looking at a situation where it's really only 3.5 miles of river that you're really getting back. So with that, name's Tom Clark. I think most of you know me. Give you an idea of where we're at here. Susquehanna River Basin, that's the Lackawanna River over on the far east. Goes through Scranton. If you know where Scranton is, that's the river going through Scranton. Over here is a little bit closer view. Most of it in Lackawanna County. I think this is Wayne and Susquehanna County, if I'm right. Okay, good, nice. I'm like a weather forecaster. And then Luzerne County here has a little bit. Most of the mining is in Lackawanna and Luzerne County. But like I said, a lot of those upper flow discharges aren't, the water quality isn't adverse. So you have the situation where there's these cold water discharges that are fairly good in quality, and which allows the Lackawanna River to be like this regional wild trout gem until you get down to this, this final 3.5 miles of the river. So I'll let you read that first. Can you see that, Bobby? I was I was lucky enough to, I was stumbling through pictures and I saw that one and I was like, oh, I gotta do this. Oh, did you show everyone the shirt you bought for it? No? Nope. Okay. So Old Forge Borehole's on the left. That picture does not do it justice. You have to be there to see it. Is it it's 48 inches, guys? You guys know more. 48, right?
So it's 8 feet wide by 5 feet deep.
So it's eight. The borehole. The borehole.
Oh, the borehole itself is 48.
That's right, 48-inch vertical borehole. So the Metro Scranton mine pulls, one of the, it's definitely the largest in the northern field. Sits below Scranton. It's under pressure. DEP, long time ago, put a borehole down it to relieve that pressure. It's 48 inches wide, and it's exploding out of this borehole. It then goes into this, you can see it right here. There's like a concrete covered channel. The borehole's way up here, in the trees, and then it comes down here and explodes out along the banks of the Lackawanna River. So when I say this is a large discharge, I think the average is around 40 to 45,000 gallons a minute. To give you an idea, we, Bobby, Mike, and I, this was probably what, 10 or 12 years ago, we always had trouble. You can't get a flow here. It's just impossible. The volume and velocity of the water will just sweep you away. So we came up with this idea that was good. I still say it was a good idea. We put drill string down into the borehole and we put pressure transducers at different lengths. And we used, it's been a long time, but I think it's Bernoulli's law, where if you show the pressure difference between distance and you know the diameter of the pipe, you can get a pretty good flow. And that worked. And then, was it Hurricane Lee? Shot this drill string right out of the borehole into the Lackawanna. Yeah, so I mean, we lost everything. We lost everything. And so what we did after that is we cut through this and actually put a transducer and tried to make a ratings curve the best we could within that channel. And that's how we got flows for a long period of time. And that's the Duryea breach. It's not as big, but it's still huge. It's 20 or 25,000 gallons a minute. Has a little more iron to it. Old Forge is about 15 parts. Duryea breach is around 20 or 25 parts. But just the intensity of flows there, when you start thinking about what you're going to need, like clarifier wise, and you start calculating those costs, in my mind, in my opinion, it just becomes cost prohibitive. So hopefully you can see that. This is off the SRBC AMD water database portal, which I built, by the way, when I was there. But to me, it's the best database around that is specific to mine drainage. Now, mind you, it's only on the Susquehanna River. Don't have it built for the Ohio or the others. But at one time, we were populating it with as much water quality and flows as we can get for all the discharges in downstream and upstream areas. So you can see the flow, how intense it is. That's in CFS, by the way. And then the iron. And keep in mind, when I say the iron's 15 now, that's the historical average. So we have data from like the 60s from there, when the iron was a lot higher because, we've gone through pyritic dissolution within that mine pool. So now it's around, like I said, like about 15 parts. But just the amount of flow there. But no, it's net alkaline, it's circumneutral. Manganese is inconsequential. There's no aluminum. So it's just an iron issue in massive flows. And that's Duryea. Little small, a little, I hate to use the word small. They're not small at all, but it's smaller than the old Forge. But you're still talking an intensity of flows that's difficult to treat if you wanted to treat it, if you wanted to go down that route. Iron's a little higher here. It's about 20 or 25 parts. And then once you come in, once those two, they're about a mile away from each other. And one of the other complexities of this is that Old Forge is on the north side and then Duryea breach is on the south side. So there's always been this idea of, they're so close, let's get them to, it's always been the north side, getting the Duryea breach onto the north side. But it's like super complex down there. And Mike can tell you this probably better than anyone. The mine pools down there are just, there's still unknowns about like how Duryea breach, where it's getting its water from. Mike thinks there's a spot in the elevation of the Old Forge, the Metro Scranton, that when it gets that elevation, it spills into the Duryea breach mine pool, and that's why we see these spikes of flow. So there's all these things that need to be tied together, and it just becomes the super complex issue that we've been looking at this thing for how long, and nothing's been done. So now to me, it's like, is there something else you can do? Kind of complex map here, but this is the Lackawanna River flowing down this way. This is the Susquehanna River. Okay, what I have turned on here is to show you how pretty good the Lackawanna is in terms of mine drainage above the discharges. The discharges occur right in this little stretch here. Your yellow streams are your wild trout reproduction streams. So you can see like even right upstream of the discharge, and this is a fairly large watershed. You would think that this would be a warm water fishery at this point down there, particularly since you're downstream of Scranton. That's not the case. There's massive trout in that stream. And then you get like Scranton's up in here, you start getting Class A situation on the Lackawanna River. And you can see it goes Class A, you start losing it a little bit, and then Old Forge and Duryea knock it out. And then I'll show you later, there's kind of a plume, maybe a lot of people use it as kind of like a backdrop slide of, what mine drainage looks like coming into a big river system. And the Lackawanna River is in my mind, is the best case picture of that. But you can see the massive trout you get in the Lackawanna River. Jake, what was that? What was the size of that one you caught there you were telling me about? I mean, 26-inch wild brown trout in a large river system through a major city. It's just odd, but it's also super cool. A little different here. I kind of moved in a little bit. That's Old Forge right there. This is town of Old Forge. That's the Old Forge borehole. Duryea breach on the south side. And you can see this section here is A and B impacted. That's the red line there. It's A and B impacted stretch of the Lackawanna. It then comes into the Susquehanna River and creates that same situation in the Lackawanna River. Susquehanna River right here is pretty clean, and I'll show you some data to verify that. But like when you start looking like what it would cost to treat these discharges and what the benefit of getting that 3.5 miles back, it just doesn't compute, and that's all I think always been the struggle here. So what else could you do? So like I said, there's that visual impact that a lot of people utilize there. That's the Lackawanna River coming in from the east into the Susquehanna River. You have this plume that you could see for, it varies during flow and things like that for a distance downstream on the Susquehanna River. But just to kind of get back to it, just to kind of summarize this, discharges are sucrum neutral. They're very net alkaline. The only impact is really that iron hydroxide. That manganese, in my mind, is inconsequential. There's really no one pulling drinking water, and at least that I know of down through there. The visual impact is significant. I mean, you can see that thing from damn space, you know. Willing to bet I'm willing to, because this is cold and the pH and alkalinity are good, I bet there's fish down through that section. Schuylkill River comes to mind. Schuylkill River looks like that, and there's trout all through it. Now, there's not as many as should be there, and maybe there's some size disparity. They're not able to get as large as they can, but I bet you there's fish in there.
I can concur as well.
Thank you, Jake. Enough out of you.
Get back to your stuff.
God, the cost benefit is what keeps everyone like, what are you going to do here? I mean, there's been estimates of a plant costing $150 million to treat those two discharges. So when you think about how much is coming in from the build program, that's like 10%. Why are you going to spend 10% on a system that's only going to bring back 3.5 miles of stream? It doesn't make any sense. What's that? But then too, Chuck, it has other discharges coming in. It's not just the Old Forge. So how much of the Susquehanna would you really get back if you only did the Old Forge and Duryea? Because then Plainsville comes in, and then it's tough to like quantify that on the Susquehanna. You back out that loading, and you're like, well, what could I get back on the Susquehanna River? I don't know how much it would be, but it would be a good exercise, I think, to kind of try to figure out where you would get to. But then, like I said, Buttonwood and Solomon, when you add those two up, they're just as big as the Old Forge is alone. So that's not too far downstream. So it's, in my mind, is you still like, you get to a point where you're like, the benefit isn't matching that $150 million cost. So how I came up with this cockamamie idea. When I was at Susquehanna River Basin Commission, there was a stream I really loved called Birch Island Run. It's in the West Branch Susquehanna River. It was one of these great situations where the stream upstream of two discharges was Class A brook. And you had these two discharges come in, ruined the situation, and then it goes in the Susquehanna River. And the discharges were of that quality that's easy to treat. Net acidic, in the mid threes, a little bit of aluminum, really not much else. They're clay mines. So King and I went up there, and we got some money, and we treated those two discharges, and those systems are functioning well. Fish and Boat Commission, it's tough to see. On my computer, it's easier to see, but this is Little Birch Island Run coming down this way. This section, they shocked recently and confirmed that there's fish down here of a Class A status. So we kind of took away that situation there. But when I started taking a look at this after we treated it, I'm like, the coal seams and they're so far away and so far elevated from the stream. You're talking 1,600 linear feet from the discharge to the stream. I started to think, was it really necessary for us to build that system? These discharges aren't huge. I mean, we're not even close with 40 or 45,000. These are more like 100-gallon-minute flows going into a small stream, right? But I'm like, you have such a large forested buffer there. Could we have captured those discharges, put a level spreader out in the forest, just drip that water into the forest over a given length, and have the forest essentially act as your treatment system through transpiration into groundwater, evaporation, things of that matter. So we had this idea, King and I, and mind you, we've already had the discharges treated, but I was like, let's test the idea. So we got like this really long stretch of black perforated pipe, and we went down, and it's real rugged territory here, so I had King do all the work, because I'm well past that. And we got down, and right this lower system, there's two systems here. There's an OLD right here and a smaller OLD right here. And this was all surface for coal, and there was some clay mining up here. But right in this area, we put the effluent of the treatment system into this level spreader and spread that effluent out hundreds and hundreds of feet in each direction into the forest with perfs. And so every once in a while, you'd see some water go into the forest. And not once have we seen that water coalesce at all downstream of here. Well, what happens to it? Well, in my mind, it's getting sucked up by the forest floor. It's getting taken up by vegetation. It's being evaporated. It's probably going down into the groundwater a little bit, but it never makes it to Little Birch Island Run. And I'm like, were these wasteful? Did we just, So I start thinking about, are there other situations like this where you could do the same thing? Not treat, but I don't know, abate, manage. I don't know what the word is. Are there other situations like this? So I started, I'm a nerd, so I started thinking about that stuff. So could something similar / a little different work at Old Forge and Duryea? So could the solution up there just merely be taking those discharges out of the system, getting them out of the Lackawanna, and just allowing a natural situation to occur over those 3.5 lower miles? Okay, then what do you do with the water? There's a ton of property, and I'll go through this downstream here, where you could probably treat it, not super effectively, but I think you could drop a decent amount of iron passively so you get away from that active capital cost, this huge active capital cost, through these properties. And then, however, instead of discharging to the Lackawanna, here's the key, instead of discharging to the Lackawanna River, you're not far from the Susquehanna River, which is like massively larger than the Lackawanna River and has more dilutional potential. So you pipe them, and you essentially, and I'm not an engineer, so an engineer would tell me how to do this. This is just the idea. You essentially level spread that water into the much larger Susquehanna and let dilution kill it. And then you clean up the last 3.5 miles of the Lackawanna River. And in my mind, I started thinking about what that could cost. Remembering that, we're at 9 figures, $150 million for a big concrete plant. Could this be a 7 or maybe a small 8-figure cost? Then you're talking to me in my mind. Then that cost benefit starts making sense. So, the data slide. So, Mike, Robert, myself, others, we have an immense amount of data on these 2 discharges. So I asked these, they sent what they had, what I had initially, put it all together. My goal was to find one day where probably it was us. We were out doing flows and quality on Old Forge and Duryea, but someone else was out that same day doing the same thing on the Susquehanna River. So you could do a mix equation then. You could say, all right, this is what the Susquehanna was that day, Old Forge same day, Duryea Breach same day, do a mix, and then see what it would be if you did that. So there was this one day in February of 2012 where probably Mike, Bobby, and I were on the Old Forge, and someone else, I don't know where, who or what, was on the Susquehanna River, probably the WQN network, probably that water quality network through DEP. And they were sampling too on the Susquehanna River, flow and quality. So that's the day. There was one day out of this immense amount. So I started, all right, what's the flows and quality? So if you took Old Forge, Duryea Breach, the Susquehanna River upstream, look at the flow. We think of Old Forge, it's just this massive flow. Look at the Susquehanna River. Look at the iron. Really low, right? So when you mix all these together, right, you go from 0.098, this is untreated. You're not even doing nothing. Look where you push the iron to. You only push it to 0.242. You don't even see that. That's not enough iron to see. And that's untreated. the water quality standard for iron is 150. You start maybe seeing it visually at like maybe 1. So then I started tinkering around a little bit. I was like, well, all right, what if you drop the Old Forge down to 5? What if you passively treat and get down to 5? Look at the iron in the Susquehanna River. You are not moving the needle because it's so large and it has so much dilutional potential. Then I was like, well, what if you do it for both? What if you knock both down to 5? Look at that. You're not even close to 1.5. And then I just started thinking, I was like, all right, what would the Old Forge borehole flow have to be to where you make the Susquehanna River downstream get close to this 1.5 standard? Old Forge borehole would have to be 10 times or more larger flow to actually move the needle enough to create a situation on Susquehanna where you're causing a water quality standard problem. So my question is that the solution? You have, Bernie and all those guys have property up there to treat it 75% effectively. I don't know what it would be, right? You treat it as well as you can, maybe in like a redundant passive system, so you can flip it back and forth so you can maintain one while you're treating it one. And instead of discharging to the Lackawanna, you discharge it to the Susquehanna River via a level spreader. So that's the idea. I don't know how to do it. That's what an engineer can tell me if that's possible and how it could be done. But the numbers show that it's a logical idea. So where do you do it? Lackawanna River is right off screen here. That property is owned by the County Line River Land Corporation property, and that's pretty much, who is that? That's the group that bought that, right? But it's under, like, Bernie has that essentially for eventual treatment, right? That area, this big black area right here. Okay, so you got like tons and tons of acreage here. A lot of this inside here is owned by Duryea Borehole. And then you get down here, and there's a section that's owned by the Naples, which is an old coal company. But I mean, it's all like swampland and stuff like this. I don't know why they would want it. It might be, you might be able to acquire it. And then down here, right at the end, is property owned by the Allegheny Sanitary Landfill property. But once again, I don't know if these are all, and Bobby and Mike know this area better than me. I don't know if these are all like gravel pits or something down there, but like, it's just like property. I'm like, why would anyone want to own this for anything other than maybe what I'm thinking about using it for? And then you, now this has been taken out. This was a 17, I think this aerial was from 17, but there was a real, this was a railroad abutment here with a railroad, and this has been taken out. But I'm like, well, right, couldn't you do it there? Couldn't you put a level spreader there? You treat as much as you can in here passively, and then you level spread your effluent of your treatment system in here, and you'll never see it. It will never be visually seen because it doesn't move the needle enough. And then you get all this back, and then it becomes 3.5 miles of additional Class A water. So that's. Any questions? I know it's late Friday. I was like, we can do this like 20, 25 minutes, get everyone out of here. Well,
All right. What?
yeah.
You hit him for let Jake talk.
There's complexity. There's complexities. You want to waste 150. I look at it both ways. $150 million for a pipe. This is not easy. It's way, way less money than anything else, in my opinion. Yeah.
Luckily, a core firm.
Like I said, I didn't say it's not, I didn't say it's not complex. To me, the idea of treating it is worse. It's more complex. It's more costly. So what's the next alternative? Yeah, everything out there is going to be complicated. But to me, this is the less complex one. Less complicated.
How long of a run is it?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at 3.5 miles of river, but it's a little squiggly, it's going to be less than that. Yeah, so you're going to be about
Question here.
My question was really just, do we know how much iron or whatever contaminants you can put into the soil before it starts killing the trees? And when do you get to that level when you're dealing with this kind of water?
Yeah.
The little bird situation is different. We're taking water that's already treated. So it has a good pH, doesn't have any iron. So in that situation, but up here, I mean, we're going to run pipe. We're going to put something across the river. So you wouldn't have, this is a slightly similar idea, but different. So that wouldn't be a situation you'd have to consider. But like the little bird situation, yeah, I think you have to consider that what the quality of the water is and could you impact vegetation. That is a question mark. But little bird should work because water, if we just tested it, the idea of treating.
So Tom, the Lackawanna River, if you're talking about both the Duryea Breach and the Old Forge, trying to deal with both of them. And I was just curious because the Lackawanna River above the Old Forge does not look orange. And yeah, I understand there's discharges above the Old Forge, but if the focus were just on the Old Forge, it might even be a little less complex. And I was just curious, do you know what the iron concentrations and flow are of the Lackawanna above the Old Forge? Yeah, the Lackawanna, just to sort of give some context to what you're talking about doing to the Susquehanna.
We do. I imagine I don't have it here, but I mean, we have it already right above Old Forge on the Lackawanna River, far
Yeah.
below. I know there's a USGS discharge there, isn't there?
Yeah, and there's
USGS discharge.
yeah, and the next discharge is way up in German, and the German discharge only spits out like 3 milligrams per liter of iron. It's actually a very good cold water sink coming in there, and then the ones that are way up into Susquehanna County aren't all that bad either. So that's why that section up there is considered Class A.
Visually, like I said, the data's there. I just have to go find it. The iron upstream in the Lackawanna above the forge is really, really low. But it just doesn't have the flow. It just doesn't have the flow to Susquehanna to, Old Forge just kills constantly.
Any other questions? Aha.
How much land is there between the Old Forge and the river? How much land are you talking about?
Lots. There's lots.
100 acres or 500 acres?
I don't know. I haven't dove into
The one
how much
spot
is there yet, but there's enough.
was it 40 acres is what they bought? Do you remember? So the one spot that oh geez, you pushed the wrong button. The one spot that he was talking about, I'll get it back up.
Yeah, I mean, what's been acquired right below the Old Forge borehole is a massive acreage property that could probably handle a passive treatment system. Now, mind you, you're not going to get 90 to 100% effectiveness at that site. But what's the goal? Should it be 90 to 100% effectiveness? I don't think it should be. Maybe it should only be 66 or 75. I don't think you have to treat the Old Forge completely to allow, well, you remove from Lackawanna, so you allow Lackawanna, but you, go back to that slide where I have the data.
Well, just really quick, I was going to show you right here. This spot is that was purchased by SMS and now has been transferred to somebody else. Is about 40 acres. So then 40.
Probably a good estimate, Bob. That's probably decent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oops. I mean here.
So, and like to go, like, I want to go back to this real quick if I may.
Who's that guy?
All right, I'm gonna go this one because I like this one. But like, this is assuming untreated. This is assuming we're not doing anything except capturing and piping the discharges upstream. It's still not doing enough to really move the needle. You think you're gonna see a difference between 0.1 and 0.2? You're not. You're not gonna visually see that.
3 minutes.
You're not gonna impact biology. And that's untreated. So I'm saying, like, let's just treat the Old Forge as best we can with the property that we have. Whether we get that from, we knock 15 down to 7.5. To me, that's the solution. complete treatment of the old forge and Duryea. It's partial treatment and movement. I keep trying to find the right word to describe this, but maybe that's it.
Any other questions? We have time for maybe one or two. Yeah. Do you want the? Okay.
You may have mentioned this earlier, but is iron the only thing of concern?
There's a little bit of manganese in that water, but it comes in and it's diluted and it's inconsequential. And like I said, I don't think we have any drinking water pools from down below there. Do we? I don't think we do, right? That would be the only time you'd be really, in my mind, that you would have any type of concern with manganese being 4 or 5 coming out of a discharge like that. To me, it's just iron. So deal with the iron and be done with it.
The first intake would probably be the power plant in Salem Township.
Yeah.
Full of water.
There's a big history up there of the coal companies kind of decimating the water, and then so they have their reservoirs up on the mountain already. So it's kind of set up in that way, where we take the drinking water from above the coal measures.
I'd just like to say, I think it's the most creative and realistic approach.
It's creative.
That discharge. The coal refuse area that you show is above grade. There's a lot of material there. Everything is junk. And so I don't even know where you would take it if you did have to remove that and try and put an active system in there.
Thanks, let's be working on that.
I think it's an interesting approach that is the best one that I've seen.
Thanks, man. And I'm the same way. You see water that's impaired, and we all kind of get tunnel vision because we're in the treatment game, and you're like, well, we have to treat that. I don't think you do, or at least I don't think you have to treat it effectively enough that people try to get to this ultimate goal of like 90 to 100%. I think you could do enough within that black rock area to fix the situation. And to me, the primary goal is to bring back the last 3.5 miles of Lackawanna River, which could be additional 3.5 miles of Class A large river system. That to me is the ultimate goal. So how do you do that the easiest and cheapest?
Okay, so if anybody has any other questions, I encourage you to find Tom. But let's give him a round of applause. All right, so the next concurrent session is going to be happening very quickly here. So if you're where you want to be, stay here. If not, move over to the next room.